And then let me know as soon as we get most of us reporting, I'll go ahead and continue on. We can see who all's kind of in the audience today, what organization you represent, if you've started any EV education and outreach plans and things like that. We always love to hear from our audience.
And we're at 60%, so we'll just wait a little bit longer.
Thank you. Okay. Let's go ahead and wrap that up just to be sensitive to our time today. And I'll go ahead and just introduce myself briefly while that's being done. My name is Amy Maxey, and I'm the current program manager with Northern Colorado Clean Cities. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, partially sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy's Clean Cities program. We help advance the nation's economic, environmental, and energy security by supporting local actions to promote the use of domestic alternative fuels and transportation, in which EVs are included. And we have partnered with Xcel Energy as Partners in Energy for this workshop series. Partners in Energy is a collaboration with Xcel Energy in order to develop and implement your community's unique energy and EV goals. We have partnered with them for our own electric vehicle action plan. And within that action plan, this workshop series was a part of that. So Lynn will go ahead and put a link to the Partners in Energy website for everyone who's interested in learning more. And if you have questions on it, please message her directly. And now I'm going to dive into some high-level highlights on how Northern Colorado Clean Cities approaches our EV education and outreach. And as some of you may already know, Clean Cities really does a great job of utilizing partnerships. And that's where we start, is by making connections and building partnerships with those individuals. So what we really do is utilize different partnerships with utilities, community leaders, transportation planners, consumers, businesses and fleets, and dealerships, as well as, EV charging station vendors. All of us play a piece and a role in our EV action plans and our education and outreach strategies. But before you create an event within your community, it's really important to learn and understand your audience and what their needs are and where they are. Maybe they aren't ready to deep dive into the recycling of electric batteries, but need to first really know what even is an electric vehicle, or vice versa. Once you know where to start and who you can connect folks with, you can educate your audience based on their starting points and needs. So for instance, I have on here the Colorado utility map. We use that a lot when we're engaging with newer communities, or any community really, to know what utility they have, what kind of rebates they can utilize, and resources that are applicable to them. So when we make that first initial contact, let's say through an email, I could highlight, hey, we notice also that you have this rebate available in your area. Or let's say there's an article of a ribbon cutting from an EV charging station. When I'm first trying to build these connections, I try to make sure that they know and see that I've done my homework and I know the community that I'm outreaching to. I know this may be different for some attendees here, if you're focused in one specific area, but for those of you who cover wide ranges and in your EV education and outreach, I find it's really helpful to do some homework ahead of time. And then when you also make that initial outreach and connection, be clear about your ask, and when available, do provide a deadline, or, I'd love to hear back from you by this date, or can I connect with you the week of March 23rd? Another thing that we're trying to do as well is utilize different communication methods. So not only just email and phone, which are both great, but utilize social media to engage with different organizations or communities and really get an idea of, who you're talking to that way. And another way that Northern Colorado Clean Cities is involved with education and outreach is through the Colorado Energy Office's Recharge Colorado program, which assigns coaches to every county of the state so that Colorado is completely covered. And Northern Colorado Clean Cities is designated in that yellow territory in the northeastern side of the state. And Recharge coaches can help in many ways. We identify financial, environmental, and economic benefits of EVs. We can help build local support for EVs and EV infrastructure. And we also partner with those dealerships on incentives that customers can use in order to purchase EVs at a discounted price and create ride and drives. So truly, that's one of my favorite things, about this program is that we can use experiential learning opportunities and educational opportunities to really have people understand what an EV is. It can be a little bit more fun sometimes, if you have an EV ride and drive event that is going on in a community at the same time that you have an EV group buy event that is offering discounted EVs, having them in partnership will allow, your community members or consumers to actually feel the car, take it for a drive in a place that's usually not at a dealership, so it's less intimidating. But then at the end of the event, you can let them know, by the way, this EV model specifically is $2,000 off at this dealership. If you're interested, you can go talk to one of the dealerships today. So we really realize that, when people truly experience EVs, they get more excited about them, and it builds a better understanding for them on what they really are. So to recap, Northern Colorado Clean Cities, we use a multifaceted approach to advance our EV goals. Once we know where to start and have made those partnerships and connections with local transportation stakeholders, we provide unbiased information and online tools to help guide them throughout their EV journey. And with those tools, we offer free technical assistance and advising in order to increase the adoption of EVs and help with the installation of EV charging stations. And we also really try to ensure that we create engaging and unique educational events. And something I would also really highly recommend is incorporating peer-to-peer learning in your events. So for instance, if you're going to a community and you're creating a ride and drive, check to see if there's any local EV enthusiast groups in the area. And if so, reach out to them and invite them to join. That way, your community members will have that peer-to-peer learning with the folks that already have an EV and drive it day to day. And they'll just be talking to, a community member like themselves and not someone like me, trying to get them all involved in EVs. They actually get real lived experiences with it. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any time on partnering on events or planning these events. We really look forward to working within our communities and statewide in order to advance these EV goals. And if you have any questions, please type them into the chat, but that's going to wrap it up for me, and we'll get started with our next presenter, Tim. But I'll give 1 second. Lynn, were there any questions in the chat?
Nope, no questions yet.
Okay, perfect. Feel free to utilize that at any time, folks. We'd love to hear from you, any questions or comments that you may have. But now I am happy to introduce Tim Aston, the Colorado State University Extension Director for Arapahoe County. Tim has led the residential outreach efforts for 3 of Xcel Energy's Partners in Energy programs in Arapahoe County, in Littleton, Englewood, and Centennial. Thank you so much for being a part of our workshop today, Tim.
Thank you. So you forgot one of our cohorts, and I actually am in the Arapahoe County Government Partners in Energy program as well. So CSU Extension has been involved with Xcel Energy and Partners in Energy for about 8 years now. Mostly my component is residential outreach. So the EV action plan that we're putting together in Centennial really has residential outreach as a major component. I'm just going to go through these things pretty quickly, and I guess we can take some questions at the end. We created a vision and a goal for Centennial. Obviously, those are important things on putting a strategy together. Centennial used innovative, collaborative, and cost-effective solutions to become a leader in EV adoption and infrastructure deployment. That's the overarching vision. And the goal is to increase the number of registered EVs in the Centennial zip codes to 18,000 by 2030, going up from 2,000 in 2020. So those are sort of overarching goals. As far as our outreach to residents go, we've got 4 major categories that we're involved with in terms of EV education. The one that we're working on now is an online EV resource page, just something that's linkable off of the centennial.gov website. That is in the build out phase right now. And I'm going to talk through a little bit where we're at with that and some of the resources that we want to get going. EV demos, as Amy said, are huge in terms of getting people comfortable with the technology. We're going to focus on that this summer. How to buy an EV guide to take away some of the mystery with regards to things like rebates and charging and things along those lines will be part of our guide. And the last one, which is probably the most important in terms of getting people into these vehicles, is dealership outreach. Xcel and the Brendel Group, who's also a part of these Partners in Energy cohorts, is going to help us with that. We actually made some pretty good traction in Centennial. We started as a regular Partners in Energy program, I think back in 2018. And that included mostly sustainable energy outreach to the community around energy efficiency, rooftop solar, solar gardens, things along those lines. We decided to do an EV workshop, I think it was at the end of 2019. I was interested in it from a technology perspective. And we had a bunch of speakers involved in that. And we did two sessions. We did one at the end of 2019 and another follow-up one in early 2020, and they were both sold out. We had 75 people in each one of those workshops. It was a great vibe. I know Zach Owens, who's part of this presentation, spoke on behalf of the Colorado Energy Office. But these photos really show you, first of all, our sort of hands-on demo outside of the hall. We had a Nissan Leaf from Boulder Nissan brought down so people can actually get in the vehicle and ask questions about it. That was great. And the workshop down below, as you can see, was a packed house. What we did was this slide deck that we used for that particular program is stored on the centennial.gov website, and that's the link to it. And I think there was a question early on if this slide deck, Amy, was going to be available to people on the call today. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I should have mentioned that at the beginning. We'll make sure to send out the slide deck, the recording, and any useful information and key contacts at the end to all of the registrants.
Great, thanks. Next slide. So this dives a little bit more into how we're going to do this online resource, if you will. The objective is to use the webpage to create a one-stop shop for Centennial residents learning about EV ownership. We've already built this out a little bit. The little panel on the right is where the two public charging stations are, Centennial public charging stations are in the city, and a short instruction, 6-step instruction panel on how to use them. But the page will be built out with more content. On the left, we're going to go through the benefits of EV, owning an EV, total cost of ownership. As you know, really, these are very inexpensive to operate, much different than a regular internal combustion engine vehicle. So we want to stress that. If you look at the lifetime ownership of a car that's EV equipped, it's much less. So I want to get that message across to people because they might be a little intimidated with the cost, purchasing costs of some of these vehicles, especially some of the higher end vehicles. In-home charging, probably the best way to charge your vehicle and the cheapest, but also have resources on public charging throughout the state of Colorado, and also through some of the businesses in Centennial and Arapahoe County in general. We're also going to have updated federal, state, and local incentives, and as you know, those are shifting and changing as we speak. But those in and of themselves give people an incentive to buy, just because of the money that you do get from the government. Thank you very much for buying into this technology. And also, there's rebate programs for the two utilities in Centennial, IREA, and Xcel Energy that we want to feature in this because those do factor into the overall costs. Our partners down below, you've heard of before. I know Zach is here from Colorado Office of Energy, and obviously the Clean Cities folks are important as well. Here's another example, of what we'll probably feature in this online resource, just some very basic things on the different ways that you charge a vehicle. This is pretty fundamental to how these things work. But I do think range anxiety and, people trying to compare what the cost is for an EV in terms of fueling it versus gasoline, all of these things are important to getting people on board with using the technology. And again, that total cost of ownership is important. But it does get a little wonky when you talk about different charger levels. Tesla has their own charging network, and there's level 2 chargers that are scattered around the state that I think Zach's going to talk about a little bit later. But it can get to be confusing if you're a consumer. So our job is to make it a little bit easier. And we'll have more of these types of graphics and charts as we build this site out. We tried to demystify this. This graphic on the right, and I apologize, it's a little hard to read. This was a sort of a PDF of a handout that we gave during those workshops, and there's a link to that handout too on the left. And it just gives prospective owners places to turn when it comes to learning more about EVs. Obviously, the city of Centennial is building out its own site, but the Colorado Energy Office has a nice site, and there's places to go where you can see what the most updated tax credits are, both federal and state, station locators, and some of the other third-party infrastructure vendors are in there as well. The terminology can get to be confusing with people. We're going from miles per gallon to, an electric equivalent in terms of charging. That's confusing. AC versus DC can be confusing. So we just tried to hand this out at the beginning of our 2 workshops and gave it to people to bring home so that they were a little bit more fluent in terms of EV technology and terminology. The demos are where it's all happening, man. So I think what Centennial is really good at, and I've been part of the Centennial Partners in Energy program for a couple of years now, is the city really turns out for city events. Whether it's a concert or whether it's an antique car show, they have a really nice a civic space in the back of the city hall that people always seem to come to. And usually Partners in Energy has a table at those events where we're handing out LED bulbs or energy efficiency kits or even, Xcel brochures and rebate booklets. But what we're going to try to do this year is to use these events as leverage points to bring EVs to those events. And I think that's the best way to get as many people as possible in the community in front of one of these things. So we'll be working with the Clean Cities folks and their relationship with the dealers to try and bring some vehicles on-prem so that we can do hopefully some ride and drive events. Dealership outreach is huge, and I do think that part of our electronic outreach is going to include all the dealerships in Centennial and neighboring counties, because Centennial residents always buy cars in Centennial, but to talk about those dealerships that do have EVs available and to integrate those folks in with our outreach so that we're bringing them business potentially, and they're also using us as sort of an advertising pipeline. So we're going to be ramping up that effort in the spring. And I think that's all I had. Does anybody have any questions? You can type them in the chat, and if I can't answer them, I can bring in Amy or Lynn to help me. But if not, then we'll, I guess we can grab some.
I can read out one question for you.
Okay.
Garrett asks, have you ever been able to tie your demo events to people actually making those purchases?
Not yet. It's been very informal. The folks that look at them basically, get that hands-on feel and that comfort level that they're looking for. and I have not followed up with from our perspective, the Nissan dealership in Boulder was at both of our events, and I never followed up with that individual salesperson as to whether or not he made a sale off of that. So, but I do think that's a good point. And what we should probably do when we do our dealership outreach is make sure that we're tracking interest levels. And then, if people do follow that through to purchase, I think that's a great idea.
To
But
add
so far,
on
no.
to that, well, Boulder Nissan is one of the top selling Nissan Leafs, I think, in the whole country. So, who knows, Tim, maybe some of those folks did go over there and, add to those numbers. I know for us, when we put on group buy events or our most recent group buy, we would also offer the free one-on-one advising. So people would literally just schedule time to speak with our executive director, Diego. And from there, we would follow up and say, did this lead to a purchase? How is this for you? Did you test drive? So you can get some information that way. But if we could really, get that through these demo events too, I agree. I think that's a great way to go to see how effective they are.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add on, Amy, is that, I'm a interested consumer. I have not bought an EV yet because my other one hasn't quite obsolesced. But I always look at the pipeline for what's coming on board, in the next 3 to 6 months. And I'm not sure we've decided what the content's going to be on this resource webpage, but I do think linking some of the articles that I'm reading to some of the manufacturer sites to get people excited about things that are coming up technology wise and available at the dealerships is exciting. I mean, the price points and the rebates, and the fact that you can now get more all-wheel drive EV options than you could a year ago are huge for Coloradans, right? So I think it's becoming more and more obvious that we're kind of at a turning point now, I think, with this technology. So it's pretty exciting.
I agree. I think is exactly what you said too, with the all-wheel drive and different styles of vehicles. That's what a lot of Coloradans need, right? To get up into the mountain towns and do the things outdoors that we love, including, the increased range. Well, thank you so much, Tim. And, if any other questions come to mind, please do type them into the chat box. But next, I'm happy to introduce LaSheita Sayer, who is the principal of ZoZo Group, which is a Colorado-based outreach and marketing agency. Since 2013, ZoZo Group has been the source for community outreach and public information for over 250 transportation and infrastructure projects throughout Colorado. She is also the founder of a local nonprofit, Women Who Charge, an advocacy group for women in the electric vehicle industry. LaSheita, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Amy, so much for having me and inviting me to be a part of this workshop. The attendees, you guys, the value that you're getting on this is insurmountable. There's nuggets and things that you would have to learn the hard way on your own that you're getting on this workshop in less than, and it's amazing. So kudos to you guys for thinking to put this together. I do run a marketing agency. I talk marketing lingo all day, every day. It's one of my favorite topics, second to electric vehicles in general. And I as a double minority myself, living here in Colorado, running a small business, I'm constantly reminded of the fact that, I am African American. I'm very proud of it. I am a female, also very proud of that. And this conversation of equity versus equality is something that we're just hearing about all the time. In fact, I'm curious, if you guys haven't heard the word equity at least 100 times this year, I'm going to make up for that in this presentation alone. You're going to hear it. Somebody needs to keep track. Maybe we should have a contest around. How many times do I say the word equity in my presentation in the next 10 minutes? You can put it in the chat later on. How many times did I use the word equity? Because I'm anxious to make sure that everyone has heard it at least 100 times this month. All right, here we go. So equity versus equality this is a graph. If you've been in this industry for a while, you've seen this several times, and how you process it and how you think about it is what I want to make sure we're all on the same page of, just generally, right? So equality, everybody gets the same thing. As a government, if you're a city or a municipality or a community, and you're looking to ensure equality, then you're applying the same standard or the same assistance or the same information to everyone in your community, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they need. Everybody gets the same thing. If you are handing out water, everybody gets water. If they don't want the water, they don't get the water. Even if they don't want the water, they get the water, right? It's available to them. Equity, on the other hand, outside of equality, it's interesting that they use so many similar letters, but they're so distinctly different. Equity is more like what you experience, especially if you're a parent or someone that's involved in family or deeply involved in community. You're looking at, what does this person need in order for all of us to be able to achieve this goal of, in this case, electric vehicle adoption? Some people are going to need different things. And when you're putting together your outreach and you're attempting to figure out how are we going to influence our community to make it so that our state can reach this ginormous goal of EV adoption, how are we going to do that? Well, you could go out and just apply the same principle to everybody in your community. Everybody gets the same message, but what you're going to end up doing is leaving some people behind. But if you take some approach and involve the thoughts and the principles of equity, you will reach some of these other smaller communities who in fact need the assistance more because it impacts them physically now. They need it to change right away. So keeping in mind, equality is everybody gets the same thing. Equity means recognizing that some people need different things in order to reach the same goal. So that, I think I said equity at least 10 times in that last slide. So if anybody's keeping track, I hope I might hand out a gift card to the person who tracks it most accurately. I'm curious to know if I'm going to meet my goal here. So some challenges that come with equity. When you're thinking about it, you should be asking yourself, how am I going to engage low wealth communities? Equity doesn't just mean because I'm a person of color, I need help. Just because I'm a female doesn't mean I need help. It's more of a social economic consideration of low wealth communities. And one of the challenges in engaging low wealth communities, there's several, but one of the top challenges is gaining trust. You're sometimes involved, oftentimes those of us that are early adopters are put in these roles to say, my job is to help introduce electric vehicles into my community. We oftentimes don't have exposure to some of these unique cultural cycles. And this, coming down off the marketing lingo, but the dynamics and social norms of these communities may be exactly how it happens in your home, and they may be very different than what happens in your home. So acknowledging that as a challenge will help make your campaign more effective. We have a challenge with this introduction and attempt to convert a community into electric vehicles of sometimes going down a rabbit hole of explaining some complex concepts. Because some people walk up, they're just like, whoa, there's no engine in this car. How does it work? They're seriously asking these very basic questions. And for the person that's been very involved in this, they instantly go to, well, the wattage and the voltage of the thing transfers over to the XYZ and the DYY. And the person's like, okay, yeah, not my kind of car. I'm going to keep it moving, right? The other challenge that you might run into is that there's an aging infrastructure for some of these low wealth communities. You're walking in talking about how easy it is to install a charging station and how easy is they're going to be able to plug their car in overnight. And they're like, I don't have a garage, or I don't have power in my garage. It's just a shed, right? To be able to understand that these aging infrastructures. And then what I think is one of the biggest challenges that we run into, especially as marketing and communication professionals, we've got this goal, we're on this mission, we're believers and we're advocates, but we want it to be perfect. And honestly, like, oh, it's such a challenge. So I'm going to step through a few of those today. Please add your questions to the chat. I feel like I'm talking to myself and I don't really like it. I'd love to be able to know that there are questions that I can answer as we move through things. And Amy, feel free to like interject. I'll see you come off mute if you see some questions that I can address as we move through, because talking to myself feels weird. And that's what I feel like I'm doing right now. Okay. So objectives, as you're putting together your outreach plan. I think, this is my opinion, this is free advice, take it for what it's worth. I think you're going to have a more successful engagement with these low income communities if you can develop a sense of ownership in this change. If there are members in that community who say, I want to see this change, not only for myself, but for my people, the health of the community, the health of the person that lives next door to them, and the health of the earth overall. If you can have them sort of buy in, whatever the phrase that you want to use, so that there are other people who become, if you want them to be your cheerleaders, but they're the people that are understanding it, not only understanding it, but believing in it, to help the community as a whole take ownership in this change. It's going to be so much more effective. Creating the sense of urgency, like climate change is now, especially for people in these communities. These kids are experiencing the highest percentage of respiratory problems than any other group of people. And they live in those places because they're the most affordable, because they're the less appealing for some other groups of people, right? So this urgency, we don't want them to be putting it off to say a year later, or 5 years later, or 10 years later, like their kids are sick now. We want them to take action as soon as possible. I also think a great objective for a campaign would be to say, you know, I'm going to plant the seed. And the next year I want to come back and make sure that it has the nutrients that it needs. And then the next year I'm going to come and I want to make sure that it has the water, and that we're constantly like, you know, we plant the seed and we're hoping that it's going to keep growing, because you've also got some ownership in the community, so that it's not the first time that they've heard of it. As a marketer, we know we're so influenced by so many things every day. You're getting pitched, you're getting introduced. Oftentimes there's studies that show you don't even recognize that you've heard of that before until you've heard it 7 times. You get that experience. I have a teenager, and it's like, I make a suggestion to her. She hears it, but she doesn't really hear it. She hears it the second time from maybe my brother will say something, uncle will say something. She'll hear it the third time, she'll hear it from a friend, she'll hear it from a teacher, she'll hear it from like the 7th time, she's like, oh, you know, Mom, I have this idea. Right? But she's somebody who's engaged in the world and getting exposed to a lot of different ideas and a lot of different brands and a lot of different approaches to solutions that she may or may not be absorbing. And as you are thinking about your campaign, you've got to plant this seed and know that it's going to probably take 7 times for somebody to even acknowledge that they've heard that idea before, especially if you're the first time that they've heard it. And that another objective might be this general persuasion. I think this speaks to the planting of the seed. It doesn't need to be super aggressive. It could be a little more passive. It could be, but you know, if your goal is to create a sense of urgency, then it's not quite as passive, but it could just be like, hey, in general and support folks, are you hearing this? Are you hearing this evolution that's coming down the path? Okay, I didn't use the word equity on that slide quite as many times.
Well, just one quick question that I have, you know, when you're trying to really get the community to take hold of this, or you're planting the seed, are there any like tips or tricks or things that, you know, you think can really help bring that ownership to the community that you can do to like help them? Of course, you want them to take ownership, but what are the first ways to plant that seed, if you will?
Planting the seed is is exposure, inviting and being a part of, when you are putting together these equity campaigns, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, Amy, was to do research. And in the marketing world, that means a little bit of book and web research, but it also means focus groups, right? It also means calling in some folks, having a set list of questions so that you can engage with them and start to understand some of the barriers that are working against your message or your goal. And and embrace those and see which of those that you can actually tackle. Which ones can you, with some of your marketing messages, because I think that's what we're talking about a lot here is outreach. What is it? What is the part of your message that can help to address some of those underlying issues for specifically that community? Not necessarily for the people sitting around your table at your office, but around the table that you invite people from that community to sit at, right? So on to this next one. Great question. I think that this helps with some of that. And trust is critical. We're creating a conversation around things that are foreign, and foreign means complicated. And you start to want to educate people about energy solutions. They need to trust you, because change moves at the speed of trust, especially in these communities where they're so reliant on hearing things from people that they trust, because for so long there are things and factors completely out of your control as the person that's putting together this outreach campaign. Unfortunately, it's a burden that you get to carry and solve. In fact, you don't have any control over the disparities that have happened over time that led that person to be in the situation that they're in, but you can be a part of the solution that helps that person get into this next phase of a transportation solution with electric vehicles. But keep in mind that you are trying to implement change, and change moves at the speed of trust. Stephen Covey wrote a book about it. I recommend it. It's an interesting conversation. It's an interesting mindset and shift to have. So just keep that in mind. And then on to this next one with equitable campaigns. Keep in mind, as you're putting together the budget, you're putting together your timeline. An equitable campaign, if you've done your research, it may simply not be as efficient as the other campaigns that you usually put together, because you're probably going to have to spend more time and more money than you have on other projects, because you're going to have to spend a little more time thinking about how to reach that community. As a marketer, a lot of this is basic because I'm trying to come up with who my target audience is and understanding and empathizing with that target audience. It requires this deliberate intention to reach them, to be successful in reaching them, instead of being a little more passive. Well, this is my message. I'm just going to send it out to everyone. Everyone gets the same direct mail. Everybody gets the same social media. Everybody, this is the campaign that I have, which is also fine if your goal is general outreach. But if your goal is equitable outreach, you'll have to be much more deliberate in your intentions. The research and focus groups sometimes I think are a little outside of the norm unless you're hiring a marketing agency who suggests that. And understanding these different messages, an example that I like to give, and we talk about it at my agency all the time, is we often walk into these conversations and say, hey, getting an electric vehicle, man, you're going to save money. It's going to be a great thing. That is a different conversation than the conversation that you're having with the person who's in the market to purchase a $60,000 Tesla versus the person who's in a market to purchase a used Volt, right? This conversation of cost savings is different for that person that's getting ready to buy a Tesla, because saving $40 a week in gas isn't impacting their bottom line as much as it's impacting the person who's buying that more cost-effective car. And in these equitable conversations that you're probably targeting, if you're hearing this part of the workshop, is that's a very big cost savings for the person who's looking at buying the Volt versus the person that's looking to buying the Tesla. So those, when you're listing out the benefits of why they should be thinking about buying an EV, those lists of benefits may not be the same. So understanding that these different groups are going to have different values. They may not be owners of their home. They may not be able to even have that conversation of getting their homes upgraded because they rent. And they don't even pay their utilities separately. So when you're talking about a cost impact on their utility bill, they're like, utility bill? I don't have one of those. I rent, it's included. Or if they have a new home versus an older home, what are the challenges that you're more likely to face with that person that owns an older home or that lives in an older home or rents an older home? Just keep those things in mind as if equity is truly part of your campaign, and I highly recommend that it is. These are some of the things to think about, how the different values that you might want to consider to include in your messaging of your campaign. So don't treat everybody the same. Have these verticals within your campaign. And I know I've given you a lot. I say strive for progress, not for perfection. We have a monumental mountain to conquer with this evolution of EVs. Starting is better than trying to make it perfect before you launch, right? If it means you have to start with your generic vanilla message, but you've got a plan in 3 months to come back and revisit something that's more targeted towards that neighborhood or targeted towards another neighborhood or targeted towards another neighborhood, I'm gonna say, I'm giving you permission, I'm lifting that burden as a marketing consultant that just dropped a ton on you about equity, that it's okay to start with something. Strive for progress. Don't let perfection be the enemy of something good, right? Because if you just spin your wheels and you're sitting around and you've got, oh no, I can't touch anything until I do a focus group. We have too much to do. We have a lot to do. So I have a few tips that I think I've seen a few other places not do so well, or that, I think has been effective. Hiring a local representative. I know for some of us, this seems so weird. I don't need to hire nobody that lives over what they're human. I understand what it takes to live. Like, why do I need to hire somebody? If you don't have somebody sitting around your table, you need to hire somebody that lives in that community, that understands that culture. And you need to pay them in a currency that matters to them. That currency, it may not be a 1099 contract that they have to sign with an agreement that's 5 pages long and proof of insurance and all this other stuff. That currency may be gift cards to King Soopers. That currency may be something else, right? Understand what that currency is to them, what they would like to do in exchange for their time of going around or hosting that barbecue at their local housing authority or at their local whatever, so that they are a local voice speaking to their community about why this is important to have happen and why the next person should be thinking about their next car being an electric car. I also suggest, Amy actually said this earlier, I'm saying it again in case you didn't hear it. One medium is not going to work, okay? It's just not going to work. You need to be able to engage them on text, on social media, on direct mail, in, like online and offline. Going to events, that's great. For certain communities, that's great. But let me tell you, people coming out to the Jazz Fest downtown in 5 Points are not going to the Jazz Fest to learn about electric vehicles. They're not going to stop at your booth, right? Maybe it's a little bit different in different communities where they know that when they go out, they're also going to get information from the government. But you need to find a multimedia mixed campaign approach to reach most of these low-income communities. And then before you launch your campaign, even if it's a text campaign or a social media campaign, invite some members of that target community in and ask them, like, hey, does this resonate with you? Does it inspire you to like take action, to talk to your neighbor, to think about looking at a car? And oftentimes, if they're comfortable enough, hopefully they'll let you know yes or no, this works. I'm inspired, I want to do something. Or they'll say, no, that doesn't work for me at all. You're not talking to me, you're talking to somebody else, because those words don't mean anything to me, or that value doesn't resonate with me. And if you do that, you're more likely to have a successful campaign. And that is my 10 minutes of free advice.
Thank
Take
you.
it or leave it.
Thank you so much. There are a couple questions in the chat, LaSheita. If you wouldn't mind looking through those, just to be aware of time, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward though right now. But I'll be able to stay on, a few minutes late if people do want to have more of a robust conversation at the end. Happy to do that. But right now, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce Zach Owens. the Senior Program Manager with the Colorado Energy Office Transportation Fuels and Technology team. Zach has led the charge on the EV fast charging programs and oversees the state's EV education, outreach, marketing, and awareness, research, and strategy development. So thank you so much, Zach, for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it. LaSheita, I really like your recommendation of progress, not perfection. I wrote that down in my notebook as you were saying it, because I think that's so true in this work. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, just acknowledging time. Amy, do you advance them for me?
Yes, I will.
Okay, if you could go to the next one. Just very quickly, the Energy Office, we're an office of the governor, and our mission is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and consumer energy costs. And one of the main focuses of that is by advancing adoption of zero emission vehicles to benefit all Coloradans. Next slide, please. So just to provide some very quick context in the next few slides, we released a 2020 EV plan last year that has a vision of 100% light duty EVs and 100% of medium and heavy duty EVs. If you could go to the next slide. Again, just kind of rapid fire context here. So one of the subsector goals within the plan is to increase the number of light duty EVs to 940,000 by 2030. And I don't have time to go through all of the plan goals, but just honing in a little more, if you could go to the next slide. As you can see in bold here, one of the sub goals within that goal is to conduct EV market research study to inform the development of consumer campaign and a dealership engagement strategy. Next slide, please. So last year we contracted with eSource, and they conducted a literature review of nationwide EV market studies and consumer awareness campaigns. They conducted over 20 interviews with EV leaders across the state. They conducted a survey of 2,000 Coloradans across the state to gauge knowledge of EVs, and ultimately released a roadmap last summer that identifies strategies for EV adoption. Next slide, please. So that culminated in this EV education and awareness roadmap, where eSource developed 6 market segments. So the first is in the driver's seat, and you can kind of see it goes through the wave of adoption through last gas. And they coupled this with our 2030 goal of 940,000 EVs on the road. And within each market segment, they identified kind of lack of knowledge and key information that needs to be communicated to these demographics. So for example, the 2 first demographics in the driver's seat and ready to roll, they need to see themselves in an EV for their next purchase. They need to understand charging, and any misconceptions that they may have about it need to be addressed. And they also need to understand cost barriers. They may have some misperceptions about cost versus, you know, the last gas and the wait, don't sell me down the line. We want to just give them general messaging about the benefits of EVs, but they're not likely to purchase an EV as their next vehicle. And so we kind of need to address both with this campaign that's going to be developed. You know, get the key messages to those who are most likely to adopt, but then general education to those who are down the line and may not buy an EV for a few years. If you could go to the next slide, please. I might skim through a few of these pretty quickly, but you know, there were 3 key insights, you know, across the board for the campaign. There are still a lot of misconceptions about charging barriers. There are a lot of misperceptions about how much it costs to purchase and own an electric vehicle. But we also saw there was a lot of interest in EVs for the environmental benefits that they have. And so a lot of people said, I'm actually open to purchasing one if I just knew about X, Y, and Z. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So been using this as an example quite a bit. 54% said false to the statement, you can charge an EV at home by plugging into a standard wall outlet. The answer is actually true. And so this shows us that there's confusion about how do you charge at home? What technology does it take? it's an opportunity. Let's educate people about how you can actually plug into a standard wall outlet. If they do want to plug into an L2, let's figure out the resources and the cooperational programs with utilities that may help them get access to L2 charging. Let's make this not like a scary technology, but something that they could easily approach. Next slide, please. This kind of ties into what I just said. 70% thought they needed special equipment to charge at home. Again, that's true for L2, but you can also plug into a standard wall outlet. So there's this educational need about range and how long it takes to charge and what the different levels of charge actually are. Next slide, please. And then awareness of tax credits were just all over the place. The state tax credits changing annually each year. There's confusion about the federal tax credit. People don't know what that means for their bottom line or how to even access some of these credits. So we just need to make this information really clear and digestible for consumers. Next slide, please. So again, sorry to rush through all of this, but the roadmap ultimately identified these key categories that a consumer goes through before they ultimately purchase their EV. So there's an awareness phase, a consideration phase, an evaluation phase. Then they make the purchase, and then they actually become an advocate, and word of mouth becomes really critical because they're educating others because they have the EV. So with this campaign we're going to be developing, we're really honing in on awareness, consideration, and evaluation. So think of it like a funnel. We need more people at the top of the funnel aware of the EVs, exploring them, educating themselves about them, asking questions about them, and increasing that general knowledge base. Next slide, please. So this is the state's approach. We are currently reviewing proposals from an RFP to develop and launch an education campaign. It's going to take a couple of phases. So like one at the top here, you see we want a general consumer awareness strategy. So that's addressing all market segments. Let's get the correct information out there. And then for those that are most likely to buy in the next 2 years, in the driver's seat and ready to roll, let's make sure we're strategically targeting them and getting them the right information so that as they prepare to make their purchase in the next 2 years, they purchase an EV and not another type of vehicle. Next slide, please. So in the fall, we assembled an advisory committee of local governments and utilities to help advise on the RFP. We're currently reviewing proposals, hoping to make an award decision and contract in April. Next slide, please. I won't walk you through all of these, but these are the kind of the general objectives and key performance indicators we'll be looking for the campaign. Is consumer awareness increasing? Do they have the right, correct knowledge? Are more EV websites being hit? Are we seeing more connection to dealerships? And ultimately, is the EV market growing faster than it would have without intervention? Because ultimately, our goal is to get people to the purchase decision. Next slide. So once we award a contractor, there will be 3 stages. 1 is creating the campaign strategy. 2 is the creative development and kind of visual elements of the campaign. And we see this process being very inclusive with partners. So, working with utilities, working with local governments, working with, different demographics in those 6 categories that eSource identified to test and refine the campaign. Because ultimately we want to collaborate with others to implement this campaign. It cannot be state-led. We all need to kind of have a stake in it and make sure we're getting the key messaging out there. And then ultimately we'll execute the campaign and launch it. But that kind of collaborative partner engagement to develop the campaign itself is really critical. Next slide, please. And I recognize we're almost at time, so I'll wrap up quickly here. So it is our goal to continue to work with partners. We want to develop a partner toolkit as part of this campaign so that nonprofits, local governments can implement the campaign materials to their their social media and to their contact lists. There will be a price agreement so that local governments and nonprofits, if they want to, can also work with the contractor to edit it for their stakeholders or for their community, and then also implement the campaign via additional paid media. And so I recognize we don't have a lot of time to get into this, but for organizations and contacts on the call today, please contact me and think about how can your organization work with the Energy Office to implement and develop the campaign. Can you budget in your next budget cycle to implement the campaign locally to your members? Do you have other ideas about how we could collaborate? And so once we're under contract, I do see, through the summer and fall, working with partners to develop and implement this campaign. So the next slide is my contact information. If you want to chat more about this, if you have ideas about how we could collaborate with your organization to make sure it's an inclusive and equitable process as well, I want to hear those ideas, because this is the time where we'll be selecting the contractor and really starting to develop it. And so I want to thank you for your time today, and sorry to speed through some of that, but please follow up if you have additional thoughts or ideas. And Amy, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Zach. And like I mentioned too, we will make sure to share all of these contacts out to you all, as well as the slides. So if you have other specific questions, we will definitely make sure that you have the correct people to reach out to for those. But Zach, it does look like Lee does have a question here. Can you share more about how you will collect your metrics, especially more visits to dealerships and actual EV purchase numbers?
It's a great question. That is something we asked proposers to propose in their RFP. So there are some subtly different proposals. How many times can I say the word proposal? Maybe I'll do a competition with LaSheita. But so I can't say exactly yet, because we're evaluating those proposals currently, and there's some subtle differences in how they'll be developing those KPIs. So I'll have more information on that once we select the contractor.
And so throughout that process, will the Colorado Energy Office make all of this information just readily available for folks too as we go along? Or is it something where like a yearly report will come out after implementation, or how will people be able to stay up to date?
Good question. So we do, what I'm envisioning is monthly partner meetings at least. Some proposers have proposed more frequent partner meetings, but I think at least monthly partner meetings to get feedback, to provide updates, to test the campaign strategies. And then over time, we're actually asking proposers to do pulse surveys. So seeing if our campaign is having an impact, or if it's not, making modifications to the current campaign and comparing that with our baseline data that eSource collected last year. So this is going to be iterative and evolve over the next few years. I mean, we have between now and 2030 to get 940,000 EVs on the road. Education, outreach, and awareness needs to be a critical strategy for the next 9 years to really meet those goals. So I think we're at the beginning of a multi-year iterative campaign strategy.
Definitely. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. If you do have other questions, please make sure to reach out to us, and we will definitely, connect back with you. I'm going to go through the last few slides here to wrap up, but if there are other questions, and if any of our speakers have time to answer any in the chat, please feel free to do so. But we do want to let you know, so this was part 2 of a 4-part series workshop. So on April 7th from 12 to 1:30, we will have a workshop for planning for fleet electrification. So we'll have a couple different speakers, but we're also going to follow that, panelist style format. So fleets who are already involved in this process, again, how I mentioned, the peer-to-peer learning I always think is the best. So we'll have folks that can talk to their experience with fleet electrification. And then on April 20th, we'll wrap up this series during Earth Day week, involving EV charging infrastructure planning. So do feel free, we'll send this information out as well in the follow-up. Feel free to send this to any contacts you think may be interested. And I am going to put up the last poll now before we wrap up. Or actually, Lynn, are you able to do that for me?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you. And if you have a couple seconds to fill this out, please do so. But otherwise, we hope to see you at workshop 3 or 4, depending on what your needs are. And Lynn, just so you know, it doesn't tell me any of the information, so use your
So
best.
we're about
judgment.
50% completed. So we'll give everyone maybe another minute just to wrap up those questions.
Okay, perfect. And I'll make sure to save the chat as well. So I know there are some, good information, is some good information there, and we can share some of that out as well. Well, thank you everybody so much. I think we can go ahead and wrap up here, and thank you so much to all of our speakers. I think, quite a bit of great information for you all today. I hope you enjoyed it. And we will see you all soon, and we'll send that follow-up email out. Thank you all so much.